Everybody, we're gonna get started here now. I don't know if you can hear me. Mic check, mic check. Awesome. All right. Everybody come in and grab a seat. If you don't know where to sit, we got some seats in the front. I promise you, we're all friendly. Come join us, get comfortable. And welcome back from the first break. For those online, we hope that you were able to get a lot more questions answered from our patient keynote and our extended Q&A. And for those in the room, we hope that there was a lot of great conversation being had. Promise, there's plenty of time for that. We got lunch, we got our networking reception, so don't worry, there's more of that to come. And before we get started on our next panel, I just want to acknowledge Hafisa and her story and her vulnerability. I think it really... Admittedly, it's a little bit of a hard act to follow, but it really anchors us all in why we do what we do, right? Women, and this panel is actually very relevant, right? Women are the biggest decision makers in healthcare. And so we're going to jump to a topic that is near and dear to all of our hearts, women's health. And one of the things that's really important for us to talk about today is the fact that it's not just, like, no offense, men in the room, but many men think, a below-the-belt issue. Women face unique challenges and health concerns such as breast cancer, cervical cancer, menopause, and pregnancy. And in the US, they still experience the highest rates of preventable and maternal mortality compared to 10 other wealthy nations. And we know this. Hafisa shared her story and the struggles that she went with, right? And it's all about more equitable healthcare. And it starts with the people who are the biggest advocates for healthcare, and it starts with women. As I said before, it's not just limited to reproductive health. It's much broader than that. Female patients are more susceptible to heart attack deaths, depression, and anxiety than their male counterparts. Despite these challenges, we all know that women's health remains an underfinanced area of healthcare investment. Not only is it underfinanced, but the political landscape is continuing to increase the access to care and put barriers in place for many. So moderating this panel to be action-oriented, because we all know I'm an action-oriented person, to how to prioritize and course-correct our approach to women's healthcare is Colby Holtzhaus, Global MedTech Commercial Lead at Organon. So we'll welcome Colby to the stage and all the panelists.
It's good to have hype people. Yes. I paid for that, actually. Thank you. All right. Thank you for that warm introduction. Are we on? Can you be heard? It is amazing to be here in this room full of women and to be up here. I've been a loyal attendee to this conference for a long time. And every year I say, bring the Kleenex next year. And I don't do it and I wear mascara. It's like I don't learn. But I'm truly honored to be with this panel today and to follow the amazing talk from Hafisa, which really has grounded us for the day and reminded us how much work we have to do. With that, what we're going to try to focus on in this panel is the success stories that give us hope. Because women's health has always been something that, we all live it, right? It's amazing to be in this room full of women. We don't actually have to tell you how bad healthcare is for women because we have all lived it. We have all been unheard. We have all had the conditions that are under-researched because women aren't in enough trials. We have all experienced care that didn't meet what we needed, and we had to be our own advocates. However, because we have you all in the room, and we believe that change can start here, and we have these amazing panelists who have so many great success stories that I've been inspired to hear as I've been getting to know them, we want to take the time to really focus on the theme of the conference, which is driving health equity. What can we do to make a difference? How can we take the early successes, the incredible sort of focus and attention that has been happening around women's health, specifically in the area that I'm focused on, which is maternal mortality. There's so much more focus now than there ever has been. So how can we capitalize on this moment to truly drive equity for women? Primarily what we're talking about today is women. There's There's all kinds of health equity. We know we can't change overall outcomes for women without changing outcomes for Black women. And so the health equity that we talk about when we talk about women's health has to take into account all of the social determinants of health for women. So that will be a theme too. But there's so much success for us to sort of dig into here. So we'll start with introductions. I'm Colby Holtzhaus. I currently work for Organon. I've been with the company since they acquired Alydia Health, which is the startup that created the JADA system, an amazing product for postpartum hemorrhage that I'm lucky enough to continue to work with today. Been working in the US for 2 years, just had the chance to take over the global business, and incredibly excited to be bringing that technology to market. So I'm going to ask these three ladies to introduce themselves as well, and to also share what was it that captivated you and brought you into women's health. So we'll start with Lauren.
So I'm Lauren Oppoliner. I'm currently the VP of Marketing at May Health. May Health is a clinical stage medical device company focused on developing a treatment for infertility related to PCOS. I see some nodding heads, so it sounds like something that people are familiar with. But I've spent my career working in medical devices. I was a biomedical engineer in college and was really drawn to the intersection of medicine and business and innovation, and have worked at big companies originally, Medtronic, and then Nevro, a medium-sized company, and then smaller stage startups most recently. But what drew me into women's health was that throughout the, midway through my career, I started going on my own journey with infertility. And we've just heard Hafiza speak so beautifully about this, but my journey spanned most of the past 10 years of my life, where in pursuit of having my own kids, I had 5 miscarriages and 15 surgeries and 3 rounds of IVF, and you name it, I probably had it at some point. And the result is that I have 2 beautiful boys now, who are my favorite people in the entire world, that I love so much. But when I met Ann Morrissey, May Health CEO, last year, and we started chatting, we met at an investor conference, and she was telling me that she was building a team and working on PCOS, and it really resonated with me. And it was like, yes, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. It's, bringing together my professional experience, my personal experience, and something that I care so much about. So I'm thrilled to be here and talking more about what we're working on at May and what my experience has been, and thrilled to be part of the panel.
I'm Mia Keys, and I serve as the Federal Affairs Director for Hologic. And many of you, if you've had a mammogram, you've probably heard of Hologic. Hologic has been the creator of 3D mammography for the most part, but we also work in cervical health and in general across women's health issues. In terms of the way that I came into this space, because I would describe my work as working at intersections of health policy, equity, and innovation. And I express that work primarily through women's health. I started out right after college. I'm a Philly girl. I don't know if I have any Philly girls in the area, but I moved to DC, and I assumed a fellowship through the Kaiser Family Foundation. At the time, they were doing something called the Barbara Jordan Health Policy Scholars Program. This was in 2008. And I worked for a gentleman named Tom Harkin. I might ring a bell for some of you. He was the senior senator at the time from Iowa. But a lot of people know him because of his work as one of the primary authors of the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, which whenever I'm talking to people about what exactly does health equity policy look like, I always call on the ADA, because it demonstrates how a policy was designed with specifically marginalized peoples in mind, and it benefits everyone. And so you know this even coming into this building today, or depending on which entrance you came in, you probably came up a ramp as opposed to a stair, and that was because of the ADA requires it. So anyhow, I had the pleasure of working for him at the time that there's a lot going on that year. Senator Obama then was running for his first term in office. But then also there was this whole conversation on creating the nation's healthcare system, or recreating the nation's healthcare system. We called it at the time Romney Care, which eventually became the ACA, which of course is not a perfect expression of legislation, but the impact, I think, of me watching and being a part in a lot of ways the crafting of the ACA, it just demonstrated to me what policymakers can do when there is a shared will to move the needle forward in terms of health and wellness for everybody. And so I wanted to know, after some time, how did all of that on the federal level look on the local level? What did that mean for people who, because this was also the year of a major recession, it was also the year where you see the erection of ICE, so people presenting for services at healthcare centers and being afraid that they'd be, deported because they're getting a flu shot. So what does all of what was happening on the federal level look like on the local level? So I went back to Philly, and I served as the city's immigrant health and language access coordinator for about a year and a half. And most of the people with whom I worked were women, and they were the backbones of their families. So I then had this federal experience, I had the local experience. I said, okay, well, how does all of this look around the world? Because this is obviously a watershed moment that's not just impacting the US, what's going on abroad. And so just by virtue of blessings and timing and everything, I packed up everything and I moved to South Africa. And I served as a researcher for an organization called Love Life. They're the largest HIV/AIDS advocacy and research organization on the continent of Africa. I essentially produced research about ways that young people came to understand themselves in terms of their sexuality, but what did that mean in terms of their socially determinant needs, their social needs and socially determinant issues with respect to risks for contracting HIV. And of course, that also meant working predominantly with their caretakers who were women, because and older women at that, because many of them had lost their parents to full-blown AIDS. And then after that, while I was in South Africa, I gained a Fulbright fellowship. And so I I went home for like 2 weeks, kissed my mom, and then moved to Indonesia. It was a very fascinating experience. I was only supposed to be there for a year, predominantly teaching English and running some public health works in the very rural area where I lived. But I ended up staying for almost 3.5 years, learned the language, learned the people, worked a lot with young people again, worked a lot with primarily with women. It's the largest Islamic nation in the world, for many of you who don't know, and it's also one of the youngest nations in the world, which is important when you're thinking about where in the world are things happening, as it will eventually bear on the U.S. I came back home to pursue graduate studies in what might as well have been another country of Nashville to me. And I had no cut on anyone who's from Nashville. I love Nashville, I really do. So I came back to pursue a PhD at Vanderbilt and Meharry Medical College. I ended up making a hard decision to leave after finishing my master's to move back to DC in 2016 for very obvious reasons politically. I think in terms of looking at what was happening in the healthcare scenario and having ideas of what would happen politically, it was important for me to move back. So I assumed a position as health policy advisor to Congresswoman Robin Kelly. She's out of Chicagoland. She runs the Health Brain Trust for the Congressional Black Caucus. And I was her advisor, and thus the advisor in terms of health policy for the Congressional Black Caucus. Served as her advisor for about 3 years, and together we, during that time, wrote the first comprehensive maternal health policy in all of congressional history. It's called the Mama's Act. I'll probably speak to that a little bit more later. And part of that has been passed into law today. And then the AMA picked me up to run their health equity work at the Center for Health Equity. And then I got pregnant, and Ms. Kelly said, come back as my chief. So I did that, and then I had a whole baby, and I said, I can't have this baby and also take care of you. And so at the time, it just so happened that Hologic and I found one another, and now I sit as their Director of Federal Affairs, and I'm very excited to be in this space. Thank you.
I'm not sure that I want to follow that.
Please. No, that's it. Don't do that. Don't do that. No.
I'm Catherine Liao. And here I am. I am the Chief Strategy Officer for a company called CardiX. You would have never heard of it. It's a medical device company that's been around for 25 years that pioneered a technology to be able to assess and measure arterial health non-invasively. And we are in the process of commercializing a solution that to take that technology and making that accessible in clinical care, primary practices, and so on. I got to maternal health by a completely different reason, and frankly, it's economics and entrepreneurship. Previously, prior to joining CardiX a year ago, I was the co-founder and CEO of a little tiny startup where I was working on developing a new type of sensor for blood pressure monitoring. The company was called Blumio, and my co-founder, who was a good friend of mine that we worked together at the World Health Organization eons ago. I was a technologist. For those, we're all here old enough to remember SARS. I was in the web engineering department responsible for WHO's website. So as a technologist, my job and my team was we kept the WHO's web servers up during SARS. This is in that 2003, 2004 time period. Fast forward, 15 years or so, my good friend now said, hey, my mother-in-law had suffered a stroke. She's recovering, but I'm really looking for a way to monitor her wellness. And I think really what's needed is a mechanism to measure blood pressure on the go. As technologists, we were naively said, oh, this is a technology problem. We can solve it. No, you can't. Yes, you can, but there are so many more that's needed. And so as we were out fundraising, pitching, and so on, some of the feedback that I got back was people don't really care about hypertension or cardiovascular disease because it takes so long to demonstrate evidence. And for people that care, they would proactively work on their health. And for those that don't, most of them just want to pop pills. So I started looking into, where are some of the impact from a cardiovascular perspective? And we know that cardiovascular is the #1 killer of women, not cancer, even though there's way more investment into cancer. And then secondly, thinking about evidence generation. What are some cardiovascular conditions where that you can actually have an impact and see results? Pregnancy, right? I'm not a mom, and I'm one of the smaller population that have chosen to not be a mom. I don't know. I'm happy to hand the babies back. And I'm not ashamed to admit that. I make a really great aunt. Got all the candy. So that's really what led me to start thinking about maternal health, understanding cardiovascular impact on women, understanding also just the risk that happens, increasing risk during pregnancy when a woman starts experiencing gestational hypertension, how that develops and evolves into preeclampsia. And really then when that switch clicked for me, which was probably about 3 years ago, really that allowed me to dive deeper into that. And I was able to take that knowledge into what I'm doing now, and to really start pioneering and really spearheading some maternal health initiatives in the role that I'm currently in.
Thank you guys for sharing your background stories. And like I said, we have an amazing group here, and I'm sure we won't be able to get to all the amazing things that we could talk about, but we have a small set of questions. And as I said, we want to focus on some inspirational stories, but not just to inspire you, but also to tell the audience how do we get this done? How do we make change? So, Mia, we'll start with you. Tell us a success that you were part of in women's health and how it came to happen. What lessons we can take for driving more change in the future.
I think the running theme here is definitely, reproductive and maternal health, and so I'll start there. So I mentioned that when I worked for Congresswoman Kelly, there had been no comprehensive legislation around maternal health, and this was around a time where there were a lot of stories popping up about women who were dying, particularly Black and Indigenous women who were dying either in the throes of giving birth or shortly thereafter. You might we hear stories about women like Kira Johnson, who, if anyone has ever watched Judge Hatchett, anybody ever watched Judge Hatchett? Okay, so Judge Hatchett, famous judge on TV, has a son named Charles Johnson. Charles' wife, Kira Johnson, was in prime health. She was a polyglot and spoke like 5 languages, jumped out of planes, raced cars, and single-handedly raised a boy child and was pregnant. And toward the end of her pregnancy, after she had given birth, she started hemorrhaging. And unfortunately, her care team did not pay attention to the pleas of her husband and her mother-in-law, and she, 14 hours later, bled out after giving birth to her second son, Langston. And we heard stories like that over and over again, and it was shocking. And the Congresswoman and I, working with Charles and working with other people, decided we have to talk to not just people on the ground and to their families, but we need to speak with national organizations, what's going on. There's also a time where the media, mostly I'd say like NPR, I think, was just starting to produce stories about it. So this was not really on anyone's radar, certainly not congressionally. And so over about 2 years, we wrote a policy. We wrote, a policy, part of which has the Mama's Act. It's MOMMA. It's Maternal and Offspring Mortality and Morbidity Awareness Act. And, it was birthed out of something really painful. But a success is that a major part of it has now passed into law. One of the issues, at least in the United States, with respect to women giving birth, especially women who are on Medicaid, there's a postpartum period of 60 days where they are covered, or at least it had been up until the passage of part of this law. But you can imagine a woman needs way more than 60 days of complete care. I mean, and you know this, you have your first checkup as a new mother a month after giving birth, and anything can transpire between then and 30 days after that. So a part of the Mama's Act pushed to ensure that there was coverage for insurance from 60 days to a year postpartum. And that was not an easy feat. There's still parts of the bill that are being reproduced and presented again in this upcoming in this second session of Congress that's coming up in January. And so I would consider that to be, honestly, my first baby. I'm so very proud of that work. I'm so very sad that it came about the way that it had to. But those lives will not have passed in vain. So that's the first thing.
Incredible achievement. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for asking.
Yeah. Catherine, tell us the success story.
Yeah, so I would say I'm still on a journey. And the success story here is really in my new role and spearheading the focus in women's health and starting with maternal health. Part of that is, so for those of you, I don't know if you have heard of the RADx challenge that NIH announced about a year ago, maybe. And this is actually probably thanks to some of Mia's work. So last year, NIH put $8 million towards accelerating development of technology that can address maternal mortality and morbidity, especially in rural areas that are maternity deserts. And so they pulled a call out, and I learned about it. Then also beginning within about a month or so of joining the company. And I said, hey guys, they're all guys, we should do this. and of course, my executive team are like, that sounds interesting, but we don't know anything about it. And so between the time I learned about the application being open to when the application was due was probably maybe like a 2-week turnaround. So fortunately, I had been spending time on thinking about maternal health and kind of copy and pasted some of the grants I had written, right? And applied. We made it through the first round from 80 applicants down to 15. Made it through the second round from 15 down to 10. And then we are in the throes of the third round going to the final process. And in that process, I've secured about $400,000 in non-dilutive funding through the program for the company. and there's another 500,000 more to be had. And so, yeah, thank you. And it's really thanks to you and thanks to really the great, people in the government that's thinking about putting money into that. And I also want to make a call out too about the success story, because it's not just me doing it. I would not have heard it if I hadn't built a network of KOLs and mentors that are working in maternal health. And it was one of them, Christina Worster, I'm going to call her out because she's the CEO of Society for Maternal Fetal Medicine. She said, hey, by the way, somebody told me about this, you should apply. And frankly, so much of certainly my successes are because of other people supporting me. I'm simply executing the door and walking through the doors that somebody else has opened for me.
Great story. Lauren.
All right, so similar to Catherine, what we're doing at May Health is very much a work in progress, but what's so exciting is that, for PCOS, so PCOS, I guess, to give some background for those of you who may not know, is an incredibly common condition. It affects upwards of 12% of women worldwide. So in the US, that translates to over 8 million women of reproductive age. It is not just a reproductive disorder. It's a cardiometabolic endocrine disorder. It leads to higher incidence of stroke, to complications during pregnancy like gestational diabetes and preeclampsia. And in case you are, still wondering if it was actually a big problem, over 50% of women who have PCOS will be diagnosed with type 2 diabetes by the time they reach age 40. So this is a very serious condition. It's also hereditary. So when a woman with PCOS is pregnant, there is a high likelihood that her daughter or son, if it's a daughter, that she would have PCOS. If it's a son, there's a higher incidence of metabolic disorder. So this has impacts generationally, in addition to, obviously the impact on the woman who has it. And there are no treatments. And that's one of the biggest kind of misperceptions that we have to address is, even with clinicians who are very well-intentioned, you start, talking about a woman with PCOS and they say, oh, well, if they're not getting their period, we just put them on birth control. That's a Band-Aid, that can help regulate a cycle. It can help manage some of the the symptoms from PCOS. It's not treating the cause. We're developing something that will hopefully be, down the road, a treatment for PCOS. The first indication we're pursuing is around fertility. But it's a technology that has actually had an interesting journey. It was founded here in the Bay Area, but then acquired by MD Start, which is a medtech incubator funded by Sofinova Partners in Paris, and they've been a wonderful investor in the technology and supporter of the technology and a supporter of wanting to focus on women's health as an underserved market and an opportunity. And so that's allowed us to advance to the point where next month we'll be starting our pivotal study, which is a huge milestone, as you all I know are well aware, to advance the technology. And so we are incredibly excited about building up the clinical data set to show the impact that this technology can have, and continuing to advance it and being able to offer it for women who have very few options. And so what I mean by that is, for a woman who has PCOS, one of the most common aspects they have is ovulatory dysfunction. So they have irregular or totally absent menstrual cycles. So they have difficulty getting pregnant. If you're not ovulating, you can't get pregnant. And the first line treatment for that is ovulation induction medication. oral medication, fairly easy as a treatment, minimal side effects, but it's only effective for somewhere between 50 and 75% of women. And so for women where that is not effective at helping them ovulate or helping them achieve pregnancy, really the next option is to move on to IVF. And IVF is wonderful technology. One of my children is an IVF baby, but it's a luxury, especially in this country. In this country, only about a quarter of women have any sort of health insurance coverage for IVF. It's increasing, but not fast enough. And the average cost of a cycle of IVF is somewhere between $12,000 and $20,000, depending on who you ask. And typically it takes 2 to 3 cycles and 2 to 3 embryo transfers to result in a pregnancy. So the number of women who can afford that as a treatment option is very, very small. I feel very fortunate. I was thinking driving home yesterday about things I wanted to touch on during the panel, this discussion, and I viscerally remember I got treatment at UCSF, which was wonderful, and going in for my last embryo transfer and swiping my credit card for $4,000 to pay for it, and just thinking at the time how much I didn't want to be doing it, but how fortunate I felt that I could, because so many women can't. We hear about women having GoFundMe and garage sales and going into debt to pay for a fertility treatment. And I mean, it makes my blood boil, because it shouldn't be that way. There should be better treatments, better access, better coverage, all of it. So that's what we're working on. We're not there yet with what we're doing at May Health, but we're in a good place and have a good start on where we're going, and are fortunate to have great partners, great clinicians that we're working with, and are really excited about what we're going to do in the future.
That's amazing. And what I hear from all of the success stories is that we're not done yet, right? But just having gotten to these points is incredible testimony to the pain that was suffered that started the journey that all of you spoke to, the blood boiling that had to get us out of bed to keep working on these problems, and it's led to where we are today, which is having more opportunity, more spotlight, and more chance to make a difference. And one of the threads that you all talked about was, that along the way you have to raise money, you have to convince people to fund your idea, to back your idea. It's a very common trope in women's health, how difficult it is to fundraise for women's health, because generally the men have all the money. And that means you have to go into this room with men and talk about vaginas. And that can be uncomfortable. So as a baseline, it's just uncomfortable. But I think it's more complicated than that. I know lots of men who are interested in women's health and women's issues, and I know lots of women who have no problem saying the word vagina out loud, so we're kind of getting good on that, right? Let's all say it. Let's all say it all right. But there's some magic sometimes to pitching women's health, and you all have been successful in doing that or have heard successful pitches. So I'd love to hear a little bit of how-to, so everybody feels like they could go out and raise money for women's health. So we're going to start with Catherine on that.
Sounds good. Pitching for women's health is obviously challenging, right? Especially when you're on stage and 90% of the room is men. And so I've adopted an approach where I talk about, well, how many of you have wives and kids? Because it's not a women's problem. It's a family problem, first of all. And secondly, now while it's how we got here is really a passion and a driver to say, look, there's a problem, it needs to be solved. But from a fundraising perspective, you still need to connect the dots to money, right? Because at the end of the day, it's really about the economics. And perhaps it's not about the economic. You can say, well, it's not really about making money. It's not about commercialization. We can pause that for a second. but let's talk about the customers. I come from an enterprise sales background. A lot of my learning and training was from Cisco systems, and really understanding how do you sell into enterprise. And there's a saying, which is companies spend money to make more money or to save money. And that's especially true in healthcare, which I really got to learn and develop an appreciation for. So a few years ago, I got a little bit fed up in fundraising when investors would say, who on the team has a healthcare background? And we were all, technologists and so on. So I said, well, screw them. So I hate to say it, but a little bit out of spite, right? I went back to school, so did a health economics program at London School of Economics. They had developed a program with the European Society of Cardiology, and it was 100% focused on cardiovascular sciences. And holy cow, the door that opened and the understanding of healthcare financing, it's so hard. Because at the end of the day, right, healthcare systems are stressed. They are not making money, or at least for the most part, they are not making money, and they shouldn't make money. And how do you help them save money so that they can deliver better patient care? And that's the dot that has to be connected. And by connecting the dots for the customers, in this case, healthcare systems and the patients, that you then translate into connecting the dots from a company economics perspective, and then be able to really articulate the business case that's needed for a company to be funded. And that's typically what I focus on. I really transitioned from talking about, look, here's a great technology, there's a met need, look how big the market is, to the, well, let's work bottoms up. Here are the pain points, here are the money being spent, this is how we can save money. And really build that out, pay that out for the audience, and take them on that journey with you.
That's great. Lauren, back to you.
Yeah, so I think a lot of pitching is about storytelling, right? And articulating the need, the problem, the population you're going to serve. And I think, at MedTech, we're fortunate right now because we have a very engaged patient population who is actively looking for solutions. And I know we'll touch more on patient advocacy in a minute, but we've been fortunate so far to partner with PCOS Challenge, which is a patient advocacy organization here in the US. They have a membership of about 50,000 women, and they have helped us get great insights into what these women are looking for. So in addition to, the insight that these women aren't being served by the current options available for treatment, it's also given us a window into, where they're being treated currently, what treatments they're pursuing, the reasons why, and how they think about the treatment we're developing, which is called ovarian rebalancing. And just a few weeks ago, we worked with them to launch a patient-focused market research survey, and we sent it out in the listserv of PCOS Challenge, and within 72 hours, we had 2,300 responses to our survey. So it was, and we had expected like 500, So I was texting Anne, this was like on a Sunday night, and I was like, I'm going to close the survey because we have 2,300 responses. Like, I think we have enough data that we'll be spending like weeks, wading through it and getting insights. But it's been incredibly helpful for us. And, in some cases, validating things that we knew or were already thinking, and in some cases, leading us to new insights around, who was prescribing first-line medication. Turns out it's a lot more in OBGYNs than in fertility clinics with reproductive endocrinologists, because not all that many women can even access a fertility clinic and a reproductive endocrinologist. And so, that's really shaping our knowledge, continuing to shape our knowledge of the patient population we're serving. And, giving us better information to be able to talk to investors about potential investors about our market, because there's, a perception that fertility care happens in fertility clinics. And, I think what we're all realizing more and more, and this isn't just through our work, there was a great series of articles published in July in The Economist. There's been, a lot in the more popular media recently with the Retrievals podcast, which if you haven't listened to it, maybe take a few deep breaths and then start listening to it. It's intense, yeah. But, there's been this narrative that, fertility care is IVF, and the work that we're doing is to try and build out the story with the supporting data that there is a much bigger need and a much bigger pool of patients who are seeking new treatments and need other options beyond just IVF. And that they're, willing to pursue those and to pay for those, and really give us the opportunity with our treatment.
Awesome.
So I've worked predominantly either in nonprofit spaces, research spaces associated with academia or the government for most of my career, with the exception of my time at Hologic and at the AMA, right? And so I'm really quite attuned to what it means to storytell, with a greater purpose in terms of the end product, which is how do we get people to buy into the problem that we're about which we have this narrative. So I want to, I'll start off by saying that, but I want to put a pin in that and then eventually come back to that if that's all right with you, Colby. Because we're sitting here in the Bay Area. This is veritably the venture capital area of the nation, right? But as a woman, as a Black woman, which are my primary intersectional identities, looking out at a crowd of women or people who identify as women. I don't see too many Black women, but that's okay, because we're going to work on that, right? But I do see people who are themselves leaders, and what I don't see, but probably most certainly exists, I'm looking at women who have disability. I'm looking at women who are religiously minoritized. Buddhists, Muslims. I'm looking at people who are members of the LGBTQIA+ community, right? And at each of the intersections of our identities as women right, as Kimberly Crenshaw talks about intersectional identities, there's always this, well, what do I need to do to really push to get my story heard? And it's a lot of uphill work. It's a lot of trying to talk other people out of, the thing that they can't get over, which is the elephant in the room, which is the intersectional identity. So it's really hard to have these conversations in this climate, especially because remember, today's what, the 12th? We're essentially, you all have been watching the news, you see what's happening around conversations around like affirmative action in education, but how does that, and I'm not assuming that everyone is either on board or not, but how does that, as a critical thinker, how does a conversation around affirmative action, why does it matter in a space like this when we're talking about pitching, we're talking about investing in women's health? Well, if you look at venture capital dollars for women amass less than 3%. Women leaders and entrepreneurs and people who are really looking to fund a cause amass less than 3% of all venture capital dollars. All venture capital is less than 3%. If you're looking at Black people amass less than 2%. And if you're looking at Black women, it's less than 0.35%. I don't know anything that's 0.35%. It is really, I don't know, right? But what does that mean in terms of being able to not even just get in the room, but if you are talking about people who are really concerned about issues that affect other people who share those intersectional identities that are significant when you're looking at disease outcomes, when you're looking at stresses associated with, that lead to things like cardiovascular related threats. You've got to be able to look at how do we help people who are at the table to look more or identify more with our intersectional identities, because that's the only way. That is the only way that sustainably we will, when there are other people who come up to the plate, they have a chance at hitting that ball out the park, right? You literally have to change the game. And I don't say that to be like kitschy or conspiratory or whatever, but that matters. Representation matters. And the science, the numbers show we just do not have people who look like the collective us who are at the tables making decisions about us. And so that is how a successful pitch is made, when you can substitute those players out. Y'all go sit on the bench.
Thank you, Mia, and all three of you for that. And actually, this is a great moment to also recognize that we were supposed to have a fourth panelist with us, Tracy Dooley of Avestria Ventures, who unfortunately was ill and wasn't able to be here. But I know that one of the things that's really important that sort of falls on what Mia's saying is Tracy is a woman at a woman-run venture fund that invests in women-run companies for women's health, life sciences. And you know what? That's pretty awesome, right? So they've been in the game for a while, and increasingly there are more and more funds looking just at women's health. They tend to be on the smaller side, but you know what's happening? I have bigger funds calling me every now and again and saying, hey, we're interested in women's health, but we're kind of curious, is this really a thing? You know, you had an exit, but is it really gonna happen? Is Organon gonna keep investing? And I keep saying, yep, we're gonna keep doing it, right? And so part of this changing out is it's starting to happen, right? It has to start small, it starts from the ground up, but we're coming. So that's part of the success story. Okay, we're winding into our last, we'll do one meteor question and then one really small question, and then we'll go to audience questions. But one of the things that we heard a lot about this morning from Hafisa was how much she had to advocate for herself and how she met with success when HCP started to advocate with her, right, and to hear her story. And advocacy is such an important part of women's health and what we're doing here today. And that also bubbles up to the organizations, the patient advocacy groups, the physician societies, the industry societies. And there haven't always been great partnerships between those groups in women's health. Not as successful. I came from cardiology. Man, we had that wired, right? The industry partners and the physician societies knew how to make the funds roll, right? We haven't quite got that dialed in yet. But again, we have some examples of some places where there's opportunity. And so I'd love to hear you guys talk about this a little bit.
Yeah. So as I touched on previously, we've been working with PCOS Challenge, which is a phenomenal organization. They do really amazing work. They hold an advocacy day every March where they have legislators from all over the country, dialing in to meet with women who have PCOS and other advocates and listening to their stories. It's a phenomenal amount of work that goes into it. They're actually have secured a meeting with the FDA and the NIH in November that is going to be a patient-focused drug discovery meeting for women with PCOS to be able to share their stories and their experience with the FDA, with NIH, in order to spur more research, more investment, more funds, allocated to this condition. But, our relationship with them, has been evolving. We got in touch with them last year and, told them about what we were doing. And they're like, okay, sounds really exciting. Well, let's, let's think about working together. And, for us, I think it was a little bit of a light bulb moment, because it was like, this is an organization serving a population of women who have had a lot of their symptoms dismissed by the healthcare system. They've repeatedly gone to physicians and been told, just lose weight and it'll get better. They have PCOS. They have a metabolic disorder. They can't just go lose weight. Many of these patients end up with eating disorders because they try to lose weight and they can't. They're told, you just need to work on your lifestyle factors and, then it'll be okay. So they've repeatedly just been, like I said, been dismissed. And it takes a lot. I think it takes a lot to gain their trust ultimately, and rightfully so. A lot of women with PCOS are African American or Hispanic, and have that added to having PCOS, potentially having issues with their weight that are largely caused by PCOS, and so you get this multifactorial, kind of battle that they're fighting to seek out good care. They're spending upwards of 3 years to get to get diagnosed with PCOS. And so in our work with PCOS Challenge, I think it's been a lot more about our actions than our words, right? And rightfully so. When we've started participating, started organizing focus groups, working with them on Advocacy Day, working with them on different initiatives and supporting things like the meeting with the FDA and the NIH, it feels like now we're starting to establish, a stronger relationship. But I think it's going to continue to be a work in progress, and it's going to continue to evolve. And we value them very highly as a partner in helping us better understand the patients that we're ultimately trying to serve. But we know that it's going to take time. They've had relationships with other other people in industry in the past that haven't panned out. So I think there's been a lot of disappointment, coupled with distrust inherently of a medical system that hasn't been serving them. And so that's a lot to overcome, to gain their buy-in and to work with them. But, I think we've got a great opportunity there, but I think it was just another aspect that was really eye-opening about the experience of a lot of these women that they've had within the medical system, that it's not like, yay, there's someone working on this. It's like, okay, we're gonna see how this goes. And I think that's fair, because the system hasn't earned their trust yet.
I love the way you put it, Lauren. The system hasn't earned their trust, because that wording matters, as opposed to the patients and the patient advocates do not trust, right? It's the former is really putting the onus on the structure to demonstrate their trustworthiness, as opposed to putting the onus on the patient to demonstrate why they deserve to be heard, right? And those are very different orientations that would generate really significantly different responses, right? When I think about what I really appreciate and what it initially attracted me to Hologic is that it's a firm industry in the breast and cervical health and women's health space. It's fairly young in terms of its engagement with policymakers, and hence why myself and my team were on board. But what I really appreciate is that they're quite clear that we've got to work with people who have already demonstrated trust to the people who are our devices are designed to serve. And without that, I certainly would have never signed on. And with it, I am more and more convinced that the role of industry, yes, you have to keep in mind the bottom line in economics, as Catherine mentioned earlier, because that matters in terms of sustainability of product. But we also have to be good stewards of our partners who are quite in the middle, you know. They're dependent on our They're dependent on our support financially, but we are very much dependent on their ability to facilitate and to help us create pathways to continuously demonstrate why we are trustworthy, the actions over the words, as you mentioned. So we work, I mentioned 2 partners that are really important to Hologic's continued success. One of them, both of them you probably have heard of. So the first one I mentioned is Black Women's Health Imperative, and which has been around for quite some time and was founded by a woman named Billie Avery. It's now run by a woman named Linda Goler-Blount. And they're actually celebrating their 40th anniversary this year. And Hologic is continuously a partner to them. I'm so excited to continuously work with them. And without them, it would be very difficult in so many ways to demonstrate why industry leaders, you know, in a space where Black and brown women especially, not exclusively, but especially are either, you know, not heeded until it's too late. And so in the case of breast and cervical cancer, you see Black and brown women aren't necessarily dying are the rates of cancer are quite similar, but they're dying at higher rates because they're presenting at later stages. Personally, I have a very good friend, a sorority sister, my line sister actually, who, I don't know if I have any Pan-Health folk in here, but does Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. All right, I see you, sis. I see you. Okay, I see you. That peak threw me off, but I'll forgive you. I'll forgive you today. No, I'm teasing. But my sorority sister, she's not even 40. She's a mother of 2, wife, vibrant woman, doesn't have any history of cancer in her family. She just had a double mastectomy 2 months ago, and her cancer was stage 3. It was hormonal in one breast, and then completely through to the nipple for both. But no one listened to her. No one listened to her for a year. She was just very insistent, like something is wrong. I feel like I have to nurse, and her children are 6 and 4. So obviously, you know, she wasn't diagnosed until April of this year, and then went through a procedure in June, and she just rang the bell for her last chemo appointment on Monday. You know, I have another friend who just went through a hysterectomy, also not yet 40, PCOS, fibroids, all kinds of things that she had no idea about. And a part of it was, you know, these are also women, they're insured, they're employed, you know, they're creators and contributors to their communities, yet and still had not been connected with partners in their healthcare whom they could trust. And it's problematic. So, and I take that very seriously. It's a part of the blood boiling thing that gets me up in the morning, although I'm trying to keep my blood pressure down. So, you know, I'm try to do that too. For sure, we do. And then the other, so these are stories that keep me mindful when moving through the industry space. The other partner, many of you know, Susan G. Komen for the Cure. So Komen was founded by a woman named Nancy Brinker, who was a sister to Susan G. Komen. Nancy went on to be an ambassador, and she's fabulous. Literally, if you've ever met her, she is fabulous. This woman is almost 80, and don't tell her I told you that though. But she's no longer running Komen. She has her own foundation in Florida, in Palm Springs. It's called the Promise Fund, and Hologic works hand in hand with the Promise Fund, and has been really instrumental in ensuring that her clinic has 3D mammography and all kinds of things to serve the women of that county. And they are just doing incredible work. And one of the things that they have recently done was secured a major funding through her member of Congress, which, by the way, if you all aren't aware, Congress historically has done something called earmarking, where funds during the appropriation process every year are allotted for what are no longer called earmarks, but community projects across one's district. And so anyone can apply for a community, for funds for the community project. Nancy Brinker did, and now she's bringing hundreds of thousands of dollars into her community to serve the breast and cervical needs of these women who are historically medically underserved. And Hologic is a part of that. I'm so very proud to be a part of that on their behalf.
All right, Catherine, I'm going to have you start off our lightning round super fast because you guys probably can't see the red light.
Oh, sure can.
We're gonna send this audience out with some homework also. I know everyone is assigning homework, which is what can you do? What can we do tomorrow to help the cause, to drive women's health forward? Give us some advice.
Yeah. Rising tide lifts all boats. And for me, it's really how can we make some of these advocacy groups and so on, especially as industry, how do we make others successful? And so I think that's really one. And I think recognizing, I think I want to, especially call out to people that are virtual, to a sense that understand, well, what is your company working on? And how many women is the solution serving? If it isn't, is it an opportunity to serve them and spearhead an initiative to do so and just start asking that question?
I would just say speak up in some way. I feel like we hear over and over again that, women's health, that no one's heard about it. No one's heard that it's a problem. If we're not speaking about it, if we stay silent, then no one's going to hear about it. So find the right way. I mean, for me, I am openly telling my story now. I didn't for a lot of years. I was too in it, and it was too much for me. But so if that's you, give yourself the grace and the time that you need, and find the right venue, the right opportunity. Like Catherine said, if it's an advocacy group, if it's helping amplify someone else's story that resonates with you in some way, in any way. Use your voice. We all have a voice. We all have a platform of some sort, regardless of our title or organization or position. And so just find something that feels like the right way for you.
Bring us home.
Ditto. And then make sure to talk to your members of Congress. First of all, please know your member of Congress before you leave this room. Look up your member of Congress. Be in touch with their legislative director to learn about their timeline for their appropriations process, and share that information with organizations with whom you work, or organizations that you'd just like to work, with whom you'd like to work. And then finally, if you are sitting at the table of power with respect to really infusing funds into organizations that are trying to get off the ground, particularly women-led organizations, Black-owned and led organizations, give them the money. Work with them and give them the money. And then finally, two finallys. Listen to women. That was 3. Listen to Black women. And then if you have children, especially boy children, teach these babies. I have a 21-month-old. He has recently learned that mama has a vagina, and it's different from, he calls it his belly button. And I'm like, it's definitely different from your belly button. But please teach these babies. Yes.
I couldn't have said it better. Thank you all so much. And then someone will have to tell us if we blew through our audience question time, or if we still have audience question time. All right, look, we can have it all. I was told it couldn't be done. I see one back here. Go ahead.
So I'm really curious, especially for Mia. So I work at stroke survivors. A lot of common. Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I'll talk louder. equity, innovation, policy, it's amazing. What I heard talked around this whole panel but not said is justice. Equity, I think you can talk to a board about patient access and equity because ultimately it means selling more product to a bigger population. But addressing the fundamental injustice that caused the inequity is a tougher conversation.
Yes, it is.
And so I'm just curious, right? Moving from government affairs and policy and advocacy into the corporate world of Hologic or working as a chief strategy officer in a startup with VC, are they open to conversations about justice and racism and affirmative action and all the things? Or do we have to compartmentalize? Can companies move beyond equity into justice? That's sort of what I'd like to hear.
That's a phenomenal question, and thank you for that. And I am going to answer your question as much as I can, and I'd love to talk to you after. So first and foremost, I want to just clarify between like what equity is, what equality is, what justice is. So equality is giving everybody the same thing. That doesn't work when obviously needs are different. Equity is the philosophy of of ensuring that people have what they need, which would essentially mean that some people will get qualitatively more or less than others, but it's dependent on their need. And it doesn't take from the other person who doesn't need as much to give to someone who needs more. And then justice is all of that, and then replacing structures that have caused harm over time is the basic way that I can explain those concepts. So when you talk about really putting into practice equity in a corporate space, putting in justice in a corporate space, it is not easy. It is not easy to have these conversations because you're talking about evaluating who's in charge, who makes what decisions, who holds the purse strings, who's speaking about different issues. And it is not by any means going to be an easy conversation to have. What I would say is look at those organizations, and Hologic is certainly one of them, and it's growing. It's not perfect, but it's growing, that has purported to be about equity before the catchphrase was sexy, right? And I believe that. I also believe there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of ensuring representativeness, not just to tokenize, but to ensure that we're doing our due diligence. And again, to use my earlier language, to be stewards, good stewards of the people we're ultimately trying to serve. So there's way more to be done. Certainly, I would say in spaces that we all occupy, but then I also am proud to see the work that I do. But I would love to continue this conversation. Thank you for that. Yeah.
I wanted to go back to the conversation we were having around fundraising and the difficulty that can present for fundraising for women and for women's health in particular. There was a study that was published in the Harvard Business Review back in 2017 that's like one of my all-time favorites that found that a big source of the differential in fundraising between men and women is the types of questions that women get asked. Women tend to get asked, even by female VCs, they tend to get asked questions about the risk and the downside, whereas men get asked questions about the upside and the opportunity and the potential.
Fascinating.
And almost all of the difference in fundraising can be explained by the differential in those questions. And there's the ability to close that gap by reframing the question. So you can get asked the risk question and give the upside answer, and it helps to close that gap in the fundraising. Is that something that you've experienced? How, for those that are out in the room or who are doing fundraising, how would you recommend they go about that reframing?
Well, I'll just start by saying I've not read that, but now I would like to. And it does resonate for me. I've both pitched a lot and watched a lot of people pitch, and the successful pitching does bring it back to the upside opportunity, right? And we talked about it's kind of about the money in the end, right? You're pitching investors, they need to show a return for their shareholders, so they need some evidence, right? And part of that is going to be your market size, part of that is your ability to demonstrate that you have the plan that's going to capitalize on that market, that you understand all the pieces that layer up into being able to penetrate the market. And then part of it is having some good comps in the marketplace. So being able to say, look, there's an exit strategy for our company, or there's an IPO opportunity for our company, or there's other companies that look like us. So you can tell your shareholders that this is a good investment, right? So it's all about having that conversation about the upside. And I'm curious to hear if there's good examples of how to reframe a downside question. But
We know that women, just by nature, we tend to not sort of oversell, right? And we will commit to the jobs that we know that we are qualified for, and men will raise their hand on something that they may know nothing about, and they'll speak very confidently. We've all had that experience. And I would say maybe that becomes a call out for MedTech women is, can we start, it comes down to practice. We don't have a lot of practice overselling ourselves. And so why wouldn't we gather together and start developing those skills as well? Because it just comes down to a skill set that we just haven't ever been asked to do, or haven't been really encouraged to do so. And so I see from my perspective is really, how do we teach ourselves and coach each other on knowing where that balance is, where we can speak confidently saying, yeah, I'm competent in doing that. Oh, and by the way, here's the upside, and I can do even more. I think that's really where we ought to anchor on and start from.
I love it.
And I'll just add, I think to me, part of it goes back to establishing the market need, right? And I think you get into a lot of rooms with a lot of investors, and I think it's improving, but if you're starting from the foundational level that they haven't heard that many people talk about infertility or miscarriages or PCOS or IVF or pregnancy complications, then it's just that much more work you have to do to get to where you want to be. And I think that goes back to us all in this room, beyond this room, talking about these things. I think the dialogue is getting out there more into the public domain, but I think in this room we are a prime group of people to expand on that and to continue to build the momentum.
You don't all have to come work in women's health right now, maybe at some point in your career, but you do have to talk about it, and you got to help the ladies around you and the men. There are many men working in women's health who are as passionate and committed as any of my female partners, but we all have to support the industry. It's for us. It's for our kids. It's for Amina, the IUD baby. That girl's going to take over the world, so we owe it to her to create a better system. So with that, I'll say thank you.